Hello and welcome to video number 1 for JavaScript. And this is going to be an introduction and we're going to do some code, but it's going to cover chapters 1 and 2 of our book. So let's go ahead and get started. If you've not already watched the videos on the introduction to the classroom and the GitHub installation and the NetBeans installation, you might want to go ahead and do that before you get going on this. So for chapter 1, we're going to look at a little bit of the history. We're going to actually write a little bit of content into a web page using some JavaScript, and we're going to look at how we use variables. We're going to also work with event handlers, and we're going to be able to learn how to connect things to an external JavaScript file. So exploring the JavaScript language. JavaScript is a programming language. It adds complexity and interactive features to websites. So it's developed to handle customer data validation for online commerce, and it is definitely used with the World Wide Web and your internet browsers. JavaScript is a scripting language. Scripting languages are different than programming languages. C, for example, is a programming language. Typically, you have to compile your code into machine code and create an executable, and it has to go through that compiler. This is a scripting language. Scripting languages don't go through a compiler. Typically, they run directly from the program or the script. They don't have to be compiled, but they do have to be translated. So scripting languages use something called an interpreter in order to do that line-by-line scan and translation for your machine. JavaScript language does use a markup language. We've had a little bit of access to some markup languages when we look at the README in our GitHub. But the one that we're most often going to use now with JavaScript is going to be our HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and that is how your web pages are viewed through your internet browsers. Another type of markup language that we are going to look at is a CSS file. You may have heard this before. It's called a cascading style sheet. That is basically defines the appearance and the layout and the design of your web page. And then finally, your JavaScript, that's going to be your interaction and how your user interacts with the actual website. In JavaScript, we have two different models. We say we have a DOM and a BOM, so a DOM and a BOM. And the DOM is the document object model, and that describes how to access the contents within the web page and what user actions can be done within the web page. Now, the BOM, or the browser object model, is going to describe how to access the features and behaviors of the browser itself. They're both considered APIs, or application programming interfaces. That is how you are going to get a handle in and connect your JavaScript to the web page. The DOM specifications are managed by a governing body called the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C. We're at a level 4. Typically, that's where we're going to stay for a little while. You don't really need to understand that. Just know that there is an overarching organization that keeps track of that. The BOM, on the other hand, is implemented directly based on the browser application. So your Google Chrome versus Microsoft Edge versus Safari, they will have different BOMs, but they largely do have the same thing among all of them. Traditionally, we look at a client-server architecture where a server is considered the back end, and it is the device that does all of the processing. So a client is going to request information, so whether it be data, calculations, communication, something like that, with a server, and the server is going to do the heavy lifting. On the other hand, the client, or what's referred to as the front end, is going to be what you have as the interface to your user. And it basically runs between your user and your server. It's going to be the one that is more aesthetically pleasing, it's more visually pleasing, And it is basically going to ask the server to go do something and then get the answer back and then present that result back to your client. Now, when we have a web-based system, we have what we call HTTP. And you may notice this when you have a URL, it'll say http dot slash slash. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. That is basically a language that the web browser and web server can communicate with. If you're going to add other applications or other servers, such as database servers for data or file servers or email servers, then we're going to start to look at a 3-tier system. You can technically have as many tiers as you want. So we do call it an N-tier client server system, which means a single client with basically as many tiers on the server as possible. So you have a basic processing tier, and then that processing tier can go and access other tiers and other servers to gather the data it needs. I bring this up because there are 2 different ways to write a script. JavaScript and client-side scripting is one of them. So your HTML produces a static document, okay, which means it doesn't change. So your client-side scripting, such as JavaScript, can respond dynamically to your user actions because it runs on the local browser client. Now, there are some security concerns where you can and cannot use JavaScript and what it can access, the commands it can run, because remember, you're basically running something on your client's machine, whether they're asking for it or not. The reverse of this is to do a server-side script. Now, a server-side script is something, for example, like a PHP or a Python, and it is executed from the web server. These languages are going to work in the processing tier, and it can handle communication between the client, data storage, all of that good stuff. JavaScript and server-side scripts operate in separate different environments, but you have to understand they have to be able to work together to deliver interactive websites to users. So, age-old question, should you use a client-side or a server-side for scripting? So, some things you need to analyze before you can make that type of decision. Who's going to be doing it? What are you going to be doing? Who are your users? Allowing the client to handle the user interface processing and other light processing, such as data validation, that would mean it would be a client side. Allowing the web server to perform intensive calculations and data storage, that would be the server side. It is beneficial to perform some of the processing on the client side because your processing power is not limited to the capabilities of the server when you're processing. Transfer times across the internet are minimized. You don't really have to use the internet, so you are increasing your speed. And server resource requirements are decreased and you can reduce costs. If you're not going to need that much power on your server because you're going to use your client, then you can get a smaller machine. In order to actually go into some code, we are going to need a few different things. We're going to use some sort of code editor or IDE, which is an integrated development environment, to manage all of our development here. For this class and for the examples for the lecture, I am using the Apache NetBeans along with a Google Chrome, and that has been sufficient so far. So if you need to have a little bit more information on how to install NetBeans, there is another video that you can find here and on the course website. Let's jump right into writing our first JavaScript program. First, we need to have what we're going to call an element. Our first element is going to be the word script. In HTML, you indicate commands by putting them in the pointy brackets. So my general syntax for embedding JavaScript code into any website HTML page is going to be a pointy bracket script with whatever I want it to say. And then in order to indicate that we are at the end of the script, it's going to be the /script. Your browser is going to stop loading the page and process the statement when it encounters that script. That's what makes it completely different from those programming languages like C, where we have to compile. This is going to do it when it encounters it. Here we have statements just like lines of code, and we're going to do an example of a document.write where we're going to insert this text into our HTML. Let's go ahead and look at some code. We are going to do just a little quick tutorial on a very fast little JavaScript. First thing I want to do is make sure that you have the class files downloaded onto your machine. If you don't, go ahead and do that now. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to navigate to where I have those class files. And I want the JavaScript, I want chapter 1, I want the JS01 chapter. Okay. In here, I want to open this js01.txt file. And I want to open it with Chrome. Okay. The next thing I want to do is I want to open that same file over here in using my NetBeans. So open file, and I'm going to navigate to that same exact file, chapter 1, JS01, chapter, and then I want the js01.txt. You can see very different here on the right. I do have the HTML sort of graphical version, and over here on the left I have the HTML text version. I'm going to go ahead and save this as, so I want to save as JS01. I'm going to get rid of the .txt, and I'm going to do that. So I can do the same thing up here. Get rid of the underscore txt, and it should give me the same file. I didn't make any changes, I just renamed it. Now, let's look at starting to code our very first script file. We're going to go into our code editor over here on the left, and we're going to scroll down and look for where it says article. Okay. After it says article, it says figure, image, fig, caption. After this fig caption tag, I'm going to put it to the end of that. I'm going to hit the enter key. I'm going to create a new tag, and I'm going to call it script. Okay. NetBeans automatically wants you to put a comment in there, which is fine. And then I'm going to end my script. And I do that by using my slash. Oops, if I could spell. There we go. So that is my beginning and my ending of my script. Let's go ahead and save this file. Save. If I were to come over here and reload, it hasn't made any changes because I haven't actually done anything yet. In between the start and the stop of the script, let's go ahead and write document write, double quotes. I'm going to put a P to indicate a paragraph, and then plant choices. I'm going to then end my HTML, double quote, and then put my semicolon at the end. Now, if I go ahead and save this and I do try to reload, it adds plant choices. Let's go through a few small basics of JavaScript. Now, JavaScript is considered an object-oriented or an object-based programming language. This basically means that you will have an object, which in your code is going to include the methods and the data. So your object knows what to do and how to do it. And it can be treated as an individual unit or component. Within that object, you are going to have procedures, and that will be the logical unit of the programming, consisting of a group of statements to perform specific tasks. The method is the procedure associated with a specific object. So for example, we can have a method call on an object called car loan, and your method could be car loan dot calculate payment 60. What that is doing is it is saying it is going to call the method calculate payments on the car loan. Methods often are going to require arguments within the parentheses, and we know from C that we call that passing arguments. A property, on the other hand, is a piece of data associated with an object. So an object's thing, such as cost, interest, value. So for this, we can say that we are going to have a simple assignment statement, putting a value for interest for the object car loan. And so my car loan dot interest can be equal to 0.0349. We just saw us use the document.write statement, and we are going to use the DOM, remember, document object. The document object has a method called write. That's the one we just used when I did that super fast little JavaScript. And that method write is going to write new contents into the web page while it's being loaded. So in order to get those changes, you have to reload. So it's going to essentially do the same thing that we did when we manually added to text of a standard body of a web document. It is useful to incorporate things that constantly change at loading time. We do require a text string like we had here in the double quotes, or what we call a literal string, which is going to be its argument, and that will be the text that is going to be inserted into the HTML. This will overwrite an entire web page if it's used after the browser finishes loading the actual page. So you just need to be careful of that. Let's take another look at some more code. I've brought back the exact same JS01.html that I just had previously. And between the opening and closing script tags here, I'm going to add on to what I already have here. So it's going to say document.write, plant choices, and then I'm going to say for, and I'm going to put a space. I'm going to get rid of that ending for now. Document.write. I'm going to add another HTML tag, which is an A, which is a reference. Single quote in here. And what this is doing is this is going to add a link specifically to this website. Okay, I'm missing a double, let's put that double quote in there. Let's see, I think everything's good now. I don't want those right, so that's okay. Document, write, and then I want to put hardiness zones, and I'm gonna finish and close out that A. Double quote, parenthesis, colon. And lastly, document.write, and I'm going to say space 5A through 6B, and that's where I'm going to end this paragraph. I'm going to put the quotes, parenthesis, and the semicolon. So here around, remember, document is our object, write is our method. I'm setting it as an argument, a string with open, close, double quotes. And in those double quotes, I just have the text that I want to be added to the HTML. And my A is the wrong way. There we go. Much better. Okay. And then I've got 5A, 6B. Okay, so if we go ahead and save this. I should be able to reload. Plant choices for hardiness zones, and you can see hardiness zones is where the link is, because that's what I said to put it right there. And that should take me to the USDA hardiness zones map. Getting into a few more points regarding JavaScript, just as in we did see, there is case sensitivity in JavaScript. So object names must always be lowercase, and incorrect capitalization, such as these examples here of a capital D document and capital all right, will cause an error. You can also add comments to a JavaScript program, very much in the same way that you do in C. So comments are going to be lines of code that are completely ignored by the browser or the interpreter or whoever, and it is more for the programmer than for the user. If you want to do a line comment, you do the same exact thing as you do in C with a double slash, and you can also do block comments, which is multi-line with the slash star to start and the star slash to finish. Let's take a look at some comments in action. We're going to add a block comment directly after our script start tag. So I'm going to hit under script, I'm going to hit the enter key, and I'm going to put a star slash, and I'm going to say information on available plants, including link to USDA website. And you can see this comment will be a multi-line comment. So let's add a single line comment and over here, and we're going to put a double slash and say hardiness zones for Chicago, Chicago. Ooh, there. So all that's doing is adding those comments. If I go ahead and file save, and if I do a reload over here, you can see nothing viewable to the user has changed. It's only for the programmer. Up till now, we've created a basic JavaScript program that is going to store comments and write text to a web page by just adding a few extra lines into an HTML. One thing that we can add to make our JavaScript more flexible and responsive to user interaction is the idea of variables. So variables are specific locations in computer memory where we're storing values. First, you create it and assign it a name, and then use it to store a value. This is exactly the same as what you do with a compiled programming language. Assigning variable names, there are rules and conventions, and for scripting, we're going to call our variables as identifiers. We must begin with an uppercase or lowercase ASCII letter, $, or underscore. It can include numbers, but not as the first character. It cannot include spaces, and it cannot be reserved words or keywords, which are special words of JavaScript syntax. The best practice to use is the same camel case that we talked about in C programming, where each word starts with a capital letter. So you kind of have your hump and your hump. That's why they call it camel case. Declaring and initializing variables. So in order to use a variable, just like in compiled programming, we must declare and initialize. So declare is creating that variable and reserving the memory, and initializing is assigning an initial value to it. And it is optional, but it's probably good programming practice to do. Syntax for declaring and initializing variables, we can use the assignment operator, which is the equal sign. And we can just say let variable equals value or var variable equals value. Syntax for declaring a variable with a constant unchangeable value is we say constant variable equals value. Remember, we have that unchanging value where it will never ever change as long as you're using the code. So some sample statements that declare and or initialize variable: let sales total, declares only; let pure order, customer order, equal 47.58, declares and initializes. And then here we have sales total equals current order. Sure. Let order number equal this value, sales total equal this value, and current order. Bunch of different ways to declare and initialize variables. Let's take a look at that in work. I'm still using my JS01, and directly before I close this script, I'm going to add some variables in here. So I'm going to put a comment there telling the code what I'm doing, well, telling the next user. Define variables containing plant file names. Okay, let blanket equal blanket.jpg, let bluestem, BLUESTEM, there we go, .jpg, and let RUGOSA equal RUGOSA.jpg. One thing that we can see here is that the default that is given to us, let's look at this line right here, has the ability to display an image, but the source attribute here is set to a hashtag or a pound sign. And so the default for that is not to display an image. Later, we're going to write some script statements to replace that attribute value with one of the variables that we're defining, so the image changes in response to different things that the user does. But for now, let's go ahead and file, save what we have done. The next topic we are going to explore is being able to build expressions and using those variables in order to perform other processes. So let's start with some vocabulary. An expression is a literal value or a variable, or you can combine literal values or variables, operators, other expressions. And what it is you're wanting to evaluate it in order to produce a result. So expressions are written using operands and operators. So your operator is going to be your symbol to manipulate the operand. The operand is going to be either a literal or a variable. So for example, an operand might be a number or a variable y. So if I say y equals x plus 3, the operands are the y, the x, and the 3. The operator is the equal sign or the assignment and the addition sign. So here's an example. Let sales total equal a value, shipping cost equal another value of 10. Let total cost equal sales total plus shipping cost. That right there is what we are considering our expression. We are using an operator of an assignment, the equal sign, and the addition, the plus sign, to add the two operands together, sales total and shipping cost. And then we have a document.write. That's going to generate HTML code that says paragraph, your total cost is value, and then end paragraph. So those 3 lines are going to be able to dynamically insert into your HTML page that number of 57.58. Now, if we are to do an expression where portion of it is in numeric and a portion of it is in string. So for example, down here at the bottom, we have a numeric 5 plus a string value of 2. What this is going to do is it's actually going to convert the 5 to a string, and it's going to give a value of a string 5, 2. It's not going to add a numeric 5 plus a numeric 2 and give you a numeric 7. It is going to basically concatenate a string 5 with a string 2 and give you the value of 52. So that's something to keep in mind when you're working with strings. In order to modify variables, we're going to use these expressions to assign new values at any point in the script. And it's going to apply to variables declare with either a let or a var. Variables declared with a constant, remember, those are constant, cannot be modified. Variables only need to be declared once and then used as many times as you need. So for example, I have two let statements, which are declaring the variables total sales, item 1 sales, item 2 sales, and item 3 sales. Then I can go ahead and take that total sales, since I did declare it, and assign it the value of item 1 sales plus 2 sales plus 3 sales. Then I can write here total sales equals and give it a number. So that is going to give us the value of 50 plus 75 plus 40, or 165. And that is the HTML that is going to write to that web page. The next topic we're going to cover is an event. And this is something that we have not covered in Programming 1, and it will be explored more in Programming 2 and above. But an event is something that happens. For example, something is clicked, something is entered in, something is done. So in JavaScript, we have certain events there are change, click, mouse over, touch, and so not all events happen with all devices. So if I say change, it is definitely going to be a keyboard trigger, and the value of an element such as a text box changes. But that change event can only be done with keyboards. Something such as a click, though, for example, can be done either using a keyboard, a mouse, or a touch screen. And a click is the same thing as what it sounds like. You either click with a mouse, you press a key, or you touch an area on the screen. We do have an event unique to the mouse and touchscreen, which is a mouse over. And that is when a user moves the mouse over a specific element, or a person touches within that element on a touchscreen. And then finally, we have one that is touchscreen only, and it's a touch end, and it's a user removes the finger or the stylus from the screen. So you're ending the actual touch event. Events are going to be associated with a specific element, with each element having its own set of events that are available. So for example, you might have a text box or a button. The click event is going to be available for a whole lot of different elements, and it can be used with all of the different various input types, such as keyboard, mouse, and touchscreen. So it's a very useful one. The load and unload are only available for the body element. We'll take a look at a few of these. Now, in order to do something when an event is triggered, we have to have something called an event handler. And what that is it is going to be the code executed in the event that event occurred. So for example, I have a button, I click on the button, it's going to take me to another website. That event is taking me to another website, whereas the event itself is the click. The syntax for the event handler is included as an attribute when you initiate the actual element. So for example, here we have element on event do something, JavaScript code. So for example, we have a window alert method, which is going to display the string passed to it in a warning window. So we can say input type equals submit, on click, give me a window alert, and in that window say, thank you for your order, we appreciate your business. You can also reference elements using something that we call an ID. And an ID is a value assigned using the HTML ID attribute. So in JavaScript, you can look up an element by its ID value using the getElementById. And that is a built-in method of the document object. So a sample HTML creating an input element with the ID value first name, we're going to have the pointy brackets, input type equals text, ID equals first name. And that's going to be a way to describe and use that element by using more of a variable name, and we're going to call it first name. Here's a line of JavaScript creating a variable that references that element. So let f name, which is the variable, equal document dot get element by ID. Give me the one that's called first name. We can also change the value assigned to that attribute by saying get element by ID dot value equals, and we give it a new value. Or if we have done that let f name that we did here in the middle, we can just say f name dot value equals the new value. Let's take a look at some of this in action. We're going to add some event listeners to these choices over here on the left-hand side. So when I click on blanket flower, it's going to display a flower picture. In order to do that, this is located on this aside here, list blanket, rugosa, and blue stream. Blanket flower, hedgerows, little blue stem. I gotta stop saying stream. Oh my goodness. Okay, so in order to do this, after the quote, I'm going to put a space, and I'm going to say on click equals quote document dot, and I can get rid of the double quote, so make sure you do that. Get element by capital B, capital I, little d, parentheses, single quote, plant image dot src equals blue, oh, which one is this? Sorry, blanket. Okay. What you're doing here, so on click, this is the event handler that's going to run the script, and the script that it's going to run is what's in these quotes directly after that. So that is the script that's run in response to clicking on blanket. Now let's take a look at what we're doing here. In this document, we're getting the element by ID, we're getting the element plant image. If you go back down to where we were before, we do have here an ID called plant image. From that plant image, we're getting the source, and here src equals the hashtag. Now, step 4, we're going to go ahead and go in and change them. This is where we're doing that. It's going to take that source and set it equal to the word blanket. Then down here, blanket is going to give it a .jpg image in order to change that image. Let's go ahead and copy that into the other two. And let's change what we say here. So this one's going to be rugosa, and this one is going to be blue stem. Okay, so now I've got on click for each one of these three. It's going to do something and set it equal to the blanket image. Blanket is the blanket image. This is going to be the rugosa, which is the rugosa image. And then that is going to be the blue stem, which is the blue stem image. Let's go ahead and save. Once we save, we can reload. Now, it doesn't look like it did a whole lot, but if I come over here to blanket flower and I click on it, all of a sudden a flower appears. This was not there before. Again, I can click on hedgerows and it changes to the hedgerows, and I can click on the blue stem and it changes to the blue stem. So that is how we do event handlers. Now, you can place this JavaScript element just about anywhere in a document. However, we do have a few things to think about when we try to find the best location for the script elements. And there are some rules that we want to keep in mind regarding the organization, including a script element for each code section. A single file HTML can actually have several or many different JavaScript elements. Please remember that statements in one script section are in fact accessible to any other script sections that follow it. Variables can be declared in a script section at the top of an HTML file, and they can be used towards the bottom or in other subsequent script sections. One of those rules that we talked about scripting is where we want to place the script element. So if you're going to do a document.write, We want to put that where the content is going to be written. It just makes it easier to follow. Now, the document object is created when we load a page. That's why when we make any changes, we do have to do a reload. And a script that references a part of the page that has not yet been loaded will in fact cause an error. So we need to make sure that those scripts are happening before. A lot of developers will put scripts at the end of a document to avoid this type of error. And we can also note that the document get element by ID method can reference page objects only after they've been loaded into the document object model. We can also create a JavaScript source file as a completely standalone file, which would have a .js extension. So this is different than actually putting it into the HTML as we have so far. In order to reference some sort of external file, we need to add syntax into our HTML to point it to the correct location. For example, we can say script, my source of my script is at this URL, and then end where the script is. So this URL is going to be the source file's name and possibly the location if it is not in the same location as your HTML file. The script element can be used to embed JavaScript code or referencing a file, but you can't do both at once. So here in this image, we have a script file. Here's my HTML and my JavaScript. So the browser is going to pause loading the HTML file when it encounters a script element. It's going to load that script element and then continue loading the HTML file when the entire script is loaded and processed. We can change that a little bit by using two keywords, async and defer. These are going to be unique to this script element. With the async attribute, you can see here that the browser is going to start loading the HTML and the JavaScript code together. And it's only going to pause in order to process this script. So the light blue here is considered the load, and the dark blue is actually running that script. Here, if I just use the script, the HTML loads, it stops, loads the script, runs the script, comes back to the HTML. If I say async, the HTML is going to load, it's going to start loading the script and then pause the HTML to run the script and then complete the HTML load. The other keyword we have is defer. And this is going to load the HTML file completely first, and then only after that HTML file is completely loaded by the browser will it go and load the script and then execute the script. Placing JavaScript code in an external file is preferable because we can share JavaScript between pages or among team members. Remember, if we put it into the HTML directly, it's only in that HTML. When we share it amongst pages, that code only needs to be downloaded one time and it can be used over and over and over again. It does keep the HTML neater and cleaner. And websites are easier to manage when the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are all in separate files. It allows you to focus on one task. Here we've got some code, but let's go ahead and look at it actually in person running. I went ahead and reopened the JS01 underscore txt.html file. Let's go ahead and put our name here under author and the date. Let's put 150 spring. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to add the script tag that is going to tell the web page where my script is located. Now, if I open up my file documents, here's my JS01 underscore text, and my .js files are in the same file location. So please make sure they're in the same file location. Here, right before we end the header, I'm going to add a new line and I'm going to put in the pointed brackets. I'm going to type the word script and a space. The source is going to be equal to quote, and inside my quotes, js01b.js. Defer, and then I'm going to end my script. What that is doing is, here we're saying we have a script. My source of my script is this file name here, and it is going to defer loading the JavaScript file until after the HTML file is loaded. That is essentially connecting your HTML to this external JavaScript file. Now I'm going to do a file save as. I'm going to put it in the same location, and I'm going to say js01b.html and hit the enter key. Over here in my browser, I'm going to go to the end and I'm going to type in that js01b and load that one. So my link for the hardiness zones is on there, and if I click on that, it does take me to where I believe it needs to. And if I go backwards, I can click on my flowers and they're there. Now, if I scroll down over here on the left, none of those script tags that I put in part A are there. The only thing that's there is the hookup to that external script file. Okay, now that we've added this connection to the external script file, you should not have to modify this HTML file again unless some of the content needs to change or something like that. So all of the changes that we make from now on can actually be made in the JavaScript file. If I go ahead and open the js01b.js file, you can see that a lot of the items that we had entered in by hand in the first several versions of this are what is in this .js. JavaScript does in fact have libraries, just as C and Java do. These libraries are going to have generic, useful scripts that we can use at any point in time. We can incorporate a library into our code by creating the script element and using the src attribute to specify the file name. Some popular ones include node.js, jQuery, and Modernizer. Developers usually create customized version of large libraries containing only the code that they need, and this is going to help make web pages run faster and limit download time. There is a way to validate your web pages as well. So we say that well-formed web page documents conform to rules and requirements of HTML, even though we're incorporating the JavaScript. We can run something called a validating parser, and that is going to check whether a web page is considered well-formed and whether it conforms to a specific set of criteria. Validation is the process of verifying that it is well-formed and checking that the elements are correctly written according to the element definitions. JavaScript can also be embedded into an XHTML and not just HTML, but this is going to create challenges when we want to do validation. So we can enclose the script element within a C data section or a PC data section. We're not going to be talking about the XHTML in this class, so we don't have to worry about that now. That was one heck of an introduction into JavaScript, but let's go ahead and move into actually section or chapter 2.